Ms. Yates, what did you tell the White House about Mr. Flynn?
I had 2 in-person meetings and 1 phone call with the White House counsel about Mr. Flynn. The first meeting occurred on January 26. I called Don McGahn first thing that morning and told him that I had a very sensitive matter that I needed to discuss with him, that I couldn't talk about it on the phone, and that I needed to come see him. And he agreed to meet with me later that afternoon. I took a senior member of the National Security Division who was overseeing this matter with me to meet with Mr. McGahn. We met in his office at the White House, which is a SCIF, so we could discuss classified information in his office. We began our meeting telling him that there had been press accounts of statements from the Vice President and others that related conduct that Mr. Flynn had been involved in that we knew not to be the truth. And as I tell you what happened here, again, I'm going to be very careful not to reveal classified information.
Well, the reason you knew it wasn't true is because she had collected some intelligence from an incidental collection system. Is that fair to say?
And I can't answer that because that, again, would call me for me to reveal classified
Let
information.
me ask you this. Did anybody ever make a request to unmask the conversation between the Russian ambassador and Mr. Flynn?
And again, Senator, I can't answer a question like that that would call for classified information.
The case?
I don't. And
Is there a way to find that out?
Well, in another setting, it could be discussed.
But there is a record somewhere of who would make a request to unmask the conversation with General Flynn and the Russian ambassador.
Well,
if one was made, there'd be a record of it.
I can't speak to this specific case, but I can generally comment that in the case of 702 requests, yes. Those are all documented.
Okay, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is important to me. How did the conversation between the Russian ambassador and Mr. Flynn make it to the Washington Post?
Well, which one of us are you asking?
Ms. Yates.
Yeah. That's a great question.
Yeah.
All of us would like to know that, and I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Nor do I know the answer to that.
Is it fair to say that if somebody did make an unmasking request, we would know who they were, and we could find out from them who they shared the information with? Is that fair to say? The system would allow us to do what I just described.
Well, unmasking requests are not made to the Department of Justice.
No, but to the agency who does the collection.
That's my understanding. Is that
so
yes,
there should be a record somewhere in our system whether or not an unmasking request was made for the conversation between Mr. Flynn and the Russian ambassador. We should be able to determine if it was made, who made it. Then we can ask, what did they do with the information? Is that a fair statement, Mr. Clapper?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what did you finish? What did you tell the White House?
Okay. All right. So I told them again that there were a number of press accounts of statements that had been made by the Vice President and other high-ranking White House officials about General Flynn's conduct that we knew to be untrue. And we told them how we knew that how we had this information, how we had acquired it, and how we knew that it was untrue. And we walked the White House counsel, who also had an associate there with him, through General Flynn's underlying conduct, the contents of which I obviously cannot go through with you today because it's classified. But we took them through in a fair amount of detail of the underlying conduct, what General Flynn had done, and then we walked through the various press accounts and how it had been falsely reported. We also told the White House counsel that General Flynn had been interviewed by the FBI on February 24th. Mr. McGahn asked me how he did, and I declined to give him an answer to that. And we then walked through with Mr. McGahn essentially why we were telling them about this. And the first thing we did was to explain to Mr. McGahn that the underlying conduct that General Flynn had engaged in was problematic in and of itself. Secondly, we told him we felt like the Vice President and others were entitled to know that the information that they were conveying to the American people wasn't true. And we wanted to make it really clear right out of the gate that we were not accusing Vice President Pence of knowingly providing false information to the American people. And in fact, Mr. McGahn responded back to me to let me know that anything that General Flynn would have said would have been based, anything that Vice President Pence would have said would have been based on what General Flynn had told him. We told them the third reason is because we were concerned that the American people had been misled about the underlying conduct and what General Flynn had done. And additionally, that we weren't the only ones that knew all of this, that the Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done, and the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others. Because in the media accounts, it was clear from the vice president and others that they were repeating what General Flynn had told them, and that this was a problem because not only did we believe that the Russians knew this, but that they likely had proof of this information. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians. Finally, we told them that we were giving them all of this information so that they could take action, the action that they deemed appropriate. I remember that Mr. McGahn asked me whether or not General Flynn should be fired, and I told him that that really wasn't our call, that was up to them, but that we were giving them this information so that they could take action. And that was the first meeting.
Thank you, and I'll go to Senator White. One very quick question.
Yeah.
Are either one of you aware of incidental collection by our intelligence community of any presidential candidate, staff, or campaign during the 2016 election cycle?
Say that again, sir. I'm sorry.
Was there any incidental collection where our intelligence community collects information involving a presidential candidate on either side of the aisle during 2015 or 2016?
No, not to my knowledge.
I believe Director Comey was also asked this question and declined to answer it, so I need to follow the same lines that DOJ has drawn. Again, you should not draw from that my answer is yes, but rather that the answer would require me to reveal classified information.
Thank you, Senator White.